Hollywood coroner says an overdose of narcotics, police say possibly heroin, is responsible for the death of the well-known rock singer Janis Joplin. Miss Joplin was found dead in her bedroom last night. She was 27
They were
years.
two of the most recognizable voices of the 1960s. They were electric, rebellious, and doomed to burn out too quickly. They were legends on stage. Off stage? That's where the narrative becomes gloomy. Everyone was aware that Janis Joplin was untamed, fearless, and unabashedly herself. However, the majority of people are unaware that there was one rock star she detested, Jim Morrison. And for good reason. It was more than simply an ego clash that led to their dramatic first meeting. Something far more unsettling was involved. It was hushed, vaguely recalled, and written off as rock and roll mayhem for decades. However, a troubling new everything we believe to be true about these two icons is altered by the new layer. Hold on tight, for what follows is not only shocking, but also unforgettable. Cruel origins. Born in Port Arthur, Texas, where tradition was strong and obedience was expected, Janis Lynn Joplin and anyone who didn't follow the rules could be expelled. Janis wasn't simply unique, she was definitely her own self. She displayed a streak of audacity from a young age, attracting in the direction of music, poetry, and art that went against what young Southern ladies were supposed to like. Janis was listening to Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, and other artists while other children were listening to mainstream or country music. African American blues musicians Lead Belly and others sung of suffering, injustice, and desire, in a manner that directly touched her heart. However, Port Arthur didn't simply misinterpret Janis, it made a conscious effort to shatter her. She was cruelly made fun of for her appearance in school. Her pimples, her erratic weight, and tomboy attire served as easy fodder for her peers. They took pleasure in making her feel insignificant. Furthermore, it was not only teasing, rather, it was the type of focused, psychological abuse that lingers and festers for a long period. What was worse was that Janis has the courage to stand up for her convictions. In a community in the South that is extremely segregated, she became a lightning rod for derision because she publicly backed racial integration. She started looking at two universities in the hopes of finding some solace: Lamar State College of Technology and Austin's University of Texas. Maybe this is where her talent would finally be acknowledged. Instead of feeling sorry for her differences. That assumption is incorrect, though. Austin had a secret the same brutality that had caused Janis's suffering in the past. Progressively creating a known for hustling in men's clothing, while barefoot and holding an autoharp at coffee shops, she was unable to get rid of the ominous shadow of judgment. In an unfathomable act of brutality, she was chosen as the ugliest man on campus by UT fraternity members. Janis's spirit was permanently burned by the scorching pain of being mocked, misinterpreted, and expelled. However, in an odd turn of events, they became the fuel for her music. As she sang, she held nothing in return. Her voice yelled, sobbed, scratched, and trembled. It was the unadulterated manifestation of someone who had experienced the rejection of the world profoundly and turned it into a strong will. She did more than just sing about the blues. She made them happen. Her music lacked both technicality and sweetness. It was pure reality that spoke to people who knew exactly what it was like to be a misfit. Her whole career, in a sense, became a means of challenging everybody who ever tried to destroy her, a way to make her identity, voice, and worth known to the world. However, When the agony followed her into adulthood, Janice turned to something else for solace, even though it would turn out to be both a blessing and a tragedy. The Southern Comfort was more than simply a beverage for Janis Joplin. It was essentially an extension of her on-stage persona. Alongside her bohemian attire, big rose-tinted glasses, and a raspy voice that could break hearts, Janis often carried a bottle of SoCo on stage as if it were a microphone. It didn't matter whether she was performing in a smoke-filled club or in front of thousands at Woodstock. The act included that bottle. She even swigged from it during sets, not just for show. Occasionally in between verses, allowing it to calm her and release the unfiltered emotion she expressed. Into each scream, she sipped it without the grace of a connoisseur. She drank it as brazenly and unrepentantly as she lived. Like Janis, the drink itself was a little misinterpreted. The majority of people, including Janis, believed that Southern Comfort was a whiskey. However, that isn't always the case legally. For a large portion of its existence, Southern Comfort was actually a flavored liqueur that is more like vodka than bourbon and is made from neutral grain spirits. She was frequently spotted with a bottle on tour buses, on stage, or relaxing beneath one arm at press conferences. Journalists and fans took notice. SoCo was incorporated into her brand, and the company noticed. Southern Comfort's creators looked to the fortunate accident, Janis Joplin's unintentional marketing goldmine. However, without receiving a single dime, she turned into their most recognizable and defiant spokesperson. The current bullion looked for as a thank you gift, send her a full-length lynx fur coat and matching hat. In such bold gesture wasn't simply a fashion statement in the late 1960s. It was a sign of prestige. Wearing it with pride, Janis said she never felt particularly gorgeous. However, similar to several emblems that characterized Janis's existence, Southern Comfort served as both a friend and a curse. She would then become blurry from the same alcohol that gave her bravery before taking the stage. Limits with it. Her relationships with booze were intricate and more than just a show. With her anguish, her fears, and the pressures of being famous, she was numbed when she didn't felt sufficient. When the world grew chilly, it kept her warm. And ultimately, beneath the burden of numerous cocktails, all of which played a part in her untimely demise at the age of just 27. Heartbreaks and lost loves despite being viewed by the world as a free-spirited, wild counterculture icon, Janis Joplin's romantic life was frequently a portrayal of a silent heartache. She had the same deep need for love as she did for artistic expression. However, she hardly ever found both in one location. Her relationships were frequently tumultuous and short-lived. Flash fires that left ashes of disappointment in their wake. With the same raw enthusiasm she brought to the stage, she pushed herself into romances, and most of the time, the only one left was her. Although some couldn't handle her passion, some lovers appreciated her intelligence. Her celebrity drew more people than her spirit. She repeatedly let herself in, only to be greeted with treachery, silence, or apathy. The example that most likely affects people emotionally in this respect took place in 1968 when she briefly met Leonard Cohen, the singer-songwriter, in New York's Chelsea Hotel. Cohen later discussed the encounter, referencing it in poetic detachment in the well-known Chelsea Hotel No. 2. What had been a minor for him, a fleeting moment appeared to carry an almost intolerable burden for Janis. That evening, she might have been searching for Chris Christopherson, but she decided to settle for whatever company was accessible, a decision that seems to cast a somber shadow over the entire situation. After several years, Cohen realizes that he wasn't entirely sure how he felt about naming Janice. In the song, he discovered too late that what had seemed to him to be simple art had probably been something a lot closer to her. Like many other evenings in her amorous life, the one ended in disappointment. Not only did those romantic disappointments affect her personally, but they also turned into the essence of her songs. Maybe Cry Baby and Piece of My Heart weren't just songs, but admissions full of that strange longing that comes when you're emptied out by love. Her hallmark was that really painful vulnerability, painfully unvarnished, flawed, and really human. It was the reason her voice could soar through so many people's hearts that has experienced the same intense longing for love and the same hurt of rejection. In each note, we were reminded by Janis Joplin that beneath the fire, the celebrity, and the fur coat was a Texas girl who yearned for to be restrained, and she never really thought she was. Fame has broken me. Notoriety just served to amplify what was already damaged. It was never intended to mend Janis Joplin. Long before the Janis, whose name everyone recognized, had already started to struggle with substance abuse, frequently turning to alcohol and amphetamines to reduce the discomfort in her body. However, she initially appeared on the national scene with Big Brother and the holding company, and then as a solo performer, she became increasingly dependent. Specifically, heroin became a major aspect of her existence. In spite of, or possibly as a result of, her meteoric success, the feelings of loneliness and self-doubt that had plagued her since infancy intensified. Those closest to her looked on helplessly as the girl who had the power to electrify 1,000 people turned into becoming more and more alone off stage. Because to their unpredictable behavior, friendships fell apart. She started to feel hollowed out by the party lifestyle that had previously given her a sense of power. Janis made multiple attempts at recovery, including leaving the San Francisco scene in the middle of the 1960s to go back to her Texas homeland in the hopes of becoming clean. However, the pull of music and the accompanying way of life was too powerful. She went back to California, returned to the public eye, and promptly rekindled old behaviors. Despite moments of clarity and hope were ephemeral. During the last few months of her life, she was documenting what would eventually pearl her most well-known solo record, and others close to her were hopeful about the future. However, she had covertly resumed using heroin behind the scenes. October 4th, Janis was discovered dead in her Hollywood home in 1970, 2 weeks after Jimi Hendrix passed away from an overdose in a hotel room. She was just 27. Her position in rock mythology was solidified by her death, not only as a remarkable voice, but also as one of the original members of the known as the 27 Club, a tragic group of talented artists who pass away at the age of 27. Following Hendrix, Morrison, Cobain, and Winehouse, Janis came to symbolize the awful, the cost of celebrity, and the vulnerability that frequently accompanies achievement. The death of Janis has captured public interest to the point where it occasionally masks the complexity of her existence. She was not a cliché at all. She was much more than just a poor victim of the 1960s. She was a perceptively smart, emotionally damaged woman with something to say. Just put it in a manner that no one else could. The biggest irony is that Pearl, Janis's album became her most polished and emotionally charged piece, which she never survived to finish. It came out a year ago, included memorable singles like Me and Bobby McGee and Mercedes-Benz later in 1971. Songs that conveyed the satirical humor and tenderness of her persona with her heartbreaking clarity. Now regarded as one of the most important albums in rock history, it serves as a sobering reminder of what was lost and what may have been. Ultimately, Janis Joplin devoted herself fully to the music, even from within herself. Her voice had been cut off far too soon, but the anguish, the intensity and passion she put into each note has reverberated for centuries. Bessie Smith's grave. Janis Joplin was a member of the blues, not only influenced by it. Of all the people who influenced her, Bessie Smith stood out the most. The renowned African-American singer referred to as the Empress of the Blues. Bessie's songs struck a strong chord with Janis, providing both emotional support and artistic direction. Born Janis identified with Bessie's unwavering display of grief, suffering, and strength in a traditional white town where she was mocked for being different. She frequently called Smith not only as an example, but also as a spiritual forebear, someone who allowed her to weep, yell, and ache aloud. Half-jokingly, Janis once expressed her belief that she might be Bessie's reincarnation. Despite being separated by decades and ethnicity, their challenges were similar in that they were both outsiders. Both had lives that ended too soon and poured heartache into music. When Janis found out that Bessie Smith had been buried, her sense of family grew even closer. Without a headstone, back in 1937. After not receiving therapy, this blues singer passed away. At a Mississippi hospital exclusively for white people, a true slap in the face of the periods. Considering all of the advancements and contributions she has made throughout her career, there was never a decent headstone for Bessie. For Janis, it was an injustice rather than merely a mistake. How could one of the strongest vocalists in American music be unheard of? Anger rising within her, Janis did something about it. She helped pay for Bessie's memorial in 1970. Smith with Juanita Green, a former employee and personal acquaintance of Smith. The two of them ensured that Bessie would finally receive the respect she had long earned. The gravestone's words, "The greatest blues," were straightforward but profound. The final lyric, "Singer in the world will never stop singing," was much more than a simple expression of admiration. It was a declaration. Janis believed that Bessie's voice had endured beyond her physical body. Echoing in the battle, in the music, in every woman who dared to speak up, passionate, unreservedly herself. Paying respect to Bessie's grave was as much an act of memory as well as legacy. It was about fairness as much as thankfulness. Janis was hesitant to allow Bessie to be quietly buried by the world because she understood what it was like to be disregarded and derided. She utilized her celebrity at that time to shed light on the situation rather than to further her own interests. Journey for a person that history had worked to forget. However, even though Janis paid tribute to one blues figure with poise, her encounter with another so-called great in real life would leave her enraged and changed forever. The Lizard King's negative aspects for many years, Jim Morrison has been a legendary person who is equal parts rock star, poet, and tormented brilliant. However, new information is making historians and fans reconsider the more sinister realities. Buried behind the myth. Before the end, searching for Jim Morrison, a 2025 documentary series, features voices from Morrison's inner circle to voice their concerns about his unpredictable and occasionally frightening actions. The chief among them is former girlfriend Judy Huddleston, who makes the horrifying claim that Morrison took advantage of her sexually when they were dating. Her account presents a terrifying image of a man whose delicate charms could be quickly transformed into violent outbursts. As stated by Huddleston, despite her frequent and unambiguous refusal, Morrison once assaulted her while pinning her arms down, stating, "He just went psycho." She described Morrison's expression, with his eyes going dark with rage, implies a man who is consumed by something much more harmful than carelessness driven by drugs. Beginning in the late 1960s, Huddleston and Morrison had a 4-year relationship. During a concert backstage. In interviews in her book Love Him Madly, she considers the emotional blackmail she endured, detailing how Morrison held her. She clung to the hope that she may transform him, but never committed to her, oblivious to the emotional toll it was taking. Perhaps the most terrible aspect of it is her later understanding that the suffering she went through was psychological and, occasionally, physical abuse. Morrison's erratic behavior was one of the things that many found attractive in him. However, beyond the lyrical mystique and stage presence, there was a person who, according on several sources, used intimidation and terror to exert power. Numerous additional violent incidents have occurred against women who were close to Morrison. Another music scene figure, Pamela Des Barres, remembers Morrison striking her across the face, for no reason, at Whiskey A Go in the 1960s. The Doors drummer John Densmore, who is frequently regarded as Morrison's closest musical collaborator, remembered seeing Morrison grasp a woman's arms and hold a knife to her. These long-ignored tales that are either idealized or written down as merely examples of rock and roll excess take on a far more sinister significance given the current cultural conversation about power and responsibility. It appears that Morrison's devastation has hurt more than just himself. It seriously hurt others in his path, particularly the women in his social circle. Maybe the fresh perspective on these incidents makes these tales even more horrifying. They distort each earlier chapter given what we now know, particularly Morrison's notorious role with Janis. It seems that Morrison and Joplin's altercation has been described as a chaotic anecdote about whiskey-infused celebrities, two legends clashing in a whirlpool of ego and energy. Now that we look at it differently, Janis supposedly reacted to Morrison's hostile instead of using diva dramatics. She uses a bottle of Southern Comfort to defend herself. The violence she experienced was